I had a feeling something was up when Sue walked out that night. It wasn't just the way she slammed the door, but the finality in her steps and the determination in her stride. For months, she'd been distant, annoyed, and confrontational, and nothing I did seemed to make a difference. Our good times were few and far between, often masked by the company of friends. My name is Kurt Randolph, and this is the story of how my 26-year marriage unraveled. It was a typical Tuesday evening. I was sitting in our living room, the TV on, but my mind was elsewhere. Sue was in the kitchen cleaning up after dinner. The clatter of dishes sounded louder than usual, like she was taking her frustration out on the plates. "Sue, can we talk?" I called. I was trying to keep my voice calm, but she didn't respond at first. She just kept scrubbing a pot. Finally, she turned to face me, and there was a look of exasperation on her face. "What is it, Kurt?" I snapped. "I'm busy." "I know you're busy, but we need to talk about this." Wiping her hands on a towel, she said, "What's there to talk about? We go through this every few weeks. I'm tired. Kurt, I'm tired of fighting. I'm tired of trying. Sue, it feels like you gave up a long time ago. We barely even talk anymore. And whose fault is that? You work all the time, and when you're home, you're on your phone or computer. You're not really here. You're checked out." Kurt, her words stung because they were partly true. I did work a lot, but I always thought it was for us and our family. I didn't realize how much it was driving us apart. "I'm sorry, Sue. I thought I was doing what was best for us." I said. My voice was soft, "But we need to talk. To figure this out, we need to reconnect." She shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. "I don't know if we can, Kurt. I don't even know if I want to anymore." That was the moment I realized just how far gone she was. It wasn't just anger or frustration. It was something deeper, a complete loss of hope. I asked her if there was someone else, and she didn't answer right away, but the look in her eyes told me everything I needed to know. She finally whispered, "Yes, there is someone else." The room felt like it was spinning. I sat down, and my legs suddenly felt too weak to hold me up. I don't know how long I managed. A few months later, she admitted that his name is David. "He makes me feel alive again." Kurt, the words cut deep, but I couldn't blame her entirely. We had both stopped trying. The empty nest, the long hours at work, the lack of intimacy. It had all taken its toll. "I can't do this." "Kurt, I want a divorce," she said, her voice breaking. I looked at her, the woman I'd spent more than half my life with, and I saw the stranger. "Sue, if that's what you want, I understand. I loved you and I still do. I just wish we could have found a way back to each other." She didn't respond, just turned and walked out the door. And she just walked out the door. That was it. 26 years of marriage over. Not with a bang but a whimper as the door closed behind her. I felt a strange sense of relief mixed with the overwhelming pain of loss. It had started long before that night, but in that moment I realized just how much it had unraveled. I suddenly realized how afraid the fabric of our life together had become. I sat there for a long time, staring at the closed door, trying to process everything. Our marriage, which had once been strong and full of promise, was now a series of bitter memories and unfulfilled dreams. I knew I had to face the future alone, but for now, all I could do was sit and mourn what once was. All I could do was sit and mourn what once was. The days after Sue walked out were a blur of pain and confusion. I threw myself into work, trying to avoid the emptiness at home, but I had this nagging suspicion about her affair. It was driving me crazy. One evening, I called my best friend Paul. Paul and I had known Sue and me for years, and were one of the few people I could trust with my fears. "Hey Paul," I said, my voice heavy with anxiety. "I need to talk to you about something serious." As soon as the words were out of my mouth, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Kurt, are you sure about this?" Paul finally asked, his tone cautious. "I'm not sure, but she's been so distant and I just have this feeling." Paul sighed deeply. "CT, I didn't want to be the one to tell you, but yes, I've heard some things. Carol, my cousin who works with Sue, mentioned seeing her with a guy. They've been having lunch together every week for the past few months." My heart sank. "Who is he?" I asked, needing to know his name. "It's David Perkins. He works at Heartland Paper Mill. He's divorced with 2 kids. Carol says he's a real charmer." Paul told me the name was like a punch to the gut. David Perkins. I repeated, feeling the anger and betrayal boiling inside me. "Thanks, Paul." I needed to know. After I hung up, I felt a strange mix. I felt a mix of relief and fury. I finally had a name and a face to my suspicions. I knew what I had to do next. A few days later, I decided to follow Sue. She had told me she was going away for a spa weekend, but I knew better. I waited until she left the house, then got into my car and tailed her. It wasn't long before I drove to the Holiday Inn on the outskirts of town. I parked a few spots away and watched as she got out of the car and greeted David with a hug and a kiss. The sight of them together was a bit of a shock. I felt a mix of heartbreak and rage, but instead of confronting them, I drove away. My mind was racing with thoughts of what to do next. I couldn't let her continue to deceive me. It was time to take action. That night, I called Tom Andrews, the sheriff and a good friend. He agreed to deliver the divorce papers while Sue was away. Tom, I need you to serve these papers to Sue while she's at. I explained to Kurt that I was trying to keep my voice steady as I told him that I needed him to serve the divorce papers to Sue while she was away. Kurt asked me if I was sure about this, and I told him that I was. I told him that Sue had made her choice, and he replied that he understood. The next morning, I went to see my lawyer, Mr. Andrews. He was efficient and sympathetic. My lawyer was really helpful and made the whole process of filing for divorce easier to understand. I left his office feeling like I was taking control of my life, even if it meant facing a future alone. I knew that the unraveling had begun, but I was ready to confront it head-on. That evening, I called my son Glenn. I knew I had to tell him and his sisters the truth. "Hey, Dad," Glenn answered. His voice was cheerful. "What's up, Glenn?" I said. "We need to talk." "It's about your mom," I began. "Oh, Glenn," he said. "Is everything okay?" "No, Glenn," I said. "It's not your mom." I told him I was getting a divorce. I could taste the bitterness in my mouth. There was a long silence. I had a feeling something was wrong. Glenn finally said, his voice heavy, "What happened?" "She's been seeing someone else for months." I confessed, feeling the weight of my words. "I'm sorry, Dad." Glenn said softly, "I'm sorry too. What are you going to do?" "I've already filed for divorce. It's time to move on." I replied, trying to sound stronger than I felt. "Okay, just let us know if you need anything." Glenn said, his concern evident. "Thanks, son. I will," I said, feeling a glimmer of hope in his support as I hung up the phone. I knew the road ahead would be tough, but for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of direction. The suspicions were confirmed. The betrayal laid bare. Now it was time to rebuild my life one step at a time. I knew it was only a matter of time before I had to confront her directly. Watching her with David at the road ahead would be tough, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I knew where I was going. It was confirmed that I had been betrayed. I had to face the fact that my life was going to have to be rebuilt from scratch. I knew it was only a matter of time before I had to confront her, sue her directly, and watch her with David at the Holiday Inn. The Holiday Inn had been a painful but necessary step. Now that I knew about her betrayal, I had to face her and put an end to the lies. It was a Saturday morning, a couple of days after she returned from her spa weekend. I had spent those days in a haze of anger and sadness, but now I felt a sense of resolve. I couldn't keep pretending everything was okay. "Sue, we need to talk," I said, standing in the doorway of our bedroom. She looked up from the book she was reading, with a hint of irritation in her eyes. "What is it, Kurt?" "I'm trying to relax. I know where you went last weekend." But my heart was racing as her expression changed from annoyance to fear. "What do you mean?" she asked, trying to sound calm. "I followed you, Sue. I saw you with David at the Holiday Inn." I felt the anger rising within me. Sue's face went pale. She put the book down and stood up facing me. "Explain," she began, but I cut her off. "Explain to me, Sue, that you've been lying to me for months and cheating on me while I've been working myself to the bone to provide for this family." I couldn't keep the bitterness out of my voice. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this," she said, tears welling. I could see the tears welling up in her eyes. "I didn't plan for any of this to happen. It just happened." I repeated, incredulous. "Sue, you don't just happen to fall into bed with another man. You made choices. You lied to me, and to our kids. For what? For a fling with some guy who doesn't care about you or your family." I started to fall for David. "I'm sorry, Kurt. I know I hurt you. I know I messed up, but things have been so bad between us for so long." I felt lost. David made me feel alive again. "What about me, Sue? What about our 26 years together? Didn't they mean anything to you?" I asked, my voice breaking. "They did, Kurt. They did. Somewhere along the line, we lost each other. I don't know how to fix it." She said, "I don't know either." I took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm inside me. "Maybe we can't fix it. Maybe it's too late. I've already filed for divorce." Her eyes widened in shock. "You what?" "I filed for divorce. You'll get the papers soon." I said it like it was, and Sue collapsed onto the bed, sobbing. I stood there, feeling a mix of anger, sadness, and relief. This was the end of us, and there was no going back. That evening, I packed a bag and decided to stay at a hotel for a few days. I needed space and time to clear my head. As I was leaving, Glenn called. "Hey, Dad, how are you holding up?" he asked, sounding concerned. "I'm managing," I replied, feeling exhausted. "How did it go?" he asked. "It was hard, but it needed to be done," I said. "I've moved out for a few days. I need some time to think," I explained. "Just know that we're here for you. Whatever you need," Glenn said. "Thanks, son. That means a lot," I said, feeling grateful for his support as I drove to the hotel. I thought about the confrontation. It had been painful, but it was also a necessary step in moving forward. The betrayal had been laid bare. Now it was time to start the process of healing. It wouldn't be easy, but I knew I had to try. In the quiet of the hotel room, I finally allowed myself to cry. I cried for the loss of my marriage, for the betrayal, and for the pain my children would feel. But as the tears fell, I also felt a strange sense of relief. The truth was out, and I could begin to rebuild my life one day at a time. I was out, and now I could start rebuilding my life one day at a time. The days following the confrontation with Sue were some of the hardest I had ever faced. I stayed at a small, quiet hotel on the edge of town, trying to put my life back together. The silence was both a comfort and a curse, giving me too much time. One evening, as I sat staring at the wall, my phone rang. It was Julia's dad. "How are you holding up?" she asked, her voice soft and concerned. I replied, trying to sound stronger than I felt. "It's been tough, but I'm getting through it. I'm so sorry about everything. I just can't believe my mom would do something like this. I know it's hard to understand, but we'll get through this. We have to," I said, trying to reassure her. "Dad, do you want me to come home for a few days? Maybe we can spend some time together." Julia offered that would be nice. I could. I said I'd be there tomorrow. She said, "Hang in there, Dad. I love you." "I love you too, Julia. See you soon." I felt a bit of warmth in the coldness of my situation the next day. Julia arrived, bringing a sense of normality back into my life. We spent the afternoon talking and trying to make sense of everything that had happened. Julia asked her dad if he'd ever forgive her mom. He didn't know. He was just trying to process everything. He said it was hard to see them both like this. She said, "I'm so sorry. I'm crying," and I took her hand. "We'll get through this, Julia. It's not going to be easy, but we'll find a way to move forward." That evening, Glenn and Rachel came over. We decided to have a family dinner, which we hadn't done in a long time. It was awkward at first, but before long, the familiar comfort of being together began to ease the tension. Glenn asked, "How are you holding up, Dad?" "It's been rough, Glenn," I replied, managing a small smile. "Are you going to move back home?" "I don't think so, Rachel," she replied, her voice tentative. I replied that I needed some time to figure things out. Glenn said that he understood, and that we were there for him, no matter what. I thanked him, and we all felt grateful for their support after dinner. We sat in the living room afterwards. We shared stories and memories, and it was bittersweet. It made me realize how strong our family is, despite everything. We still had each other. The following weeks were a blur of legal meetings, paperwork, and difficult conversations. Sue and I tried to keep things civil for the sake of the kids, but we were still coming to terms with the betrayal, and the wounds were still fresh. One afternoon, I got a call from Kurt. She said, "Can we talk?" I replied, "Sure. What's on your mind?" I tried to keep my emotions in check. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry for everything. I know I hurt you, and I hate myself for it." Her voice broke as she said, "I appreciate that, Sue, but it's going to take time. A lot of time." "I understand," I replied. "I just hope someday you can forgive me." "Maybe," she said softly, "but right now I need to focus on moving forward." As the months went by, I felt a sense of closure in the conversation. I started rebuilding my life. I found solace in my work, spending time with my kids, and even starting to explore new hobbies. The pain of the past was still there, but it was beginning to fade, replaced by a cautious sense of hope for the future. One evening, as I sat on the porch watching the sunset, Glenn joined me. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said about moving forward." He began, "Yeah." I asked him what he meant by that. "I think I'm ready to make some changes in my own life. Seeing you go through this has made me realize what's important. It's not easy, but it's worth it." I felt a surge of pride for my son. "Thanks, Dad. We'll get through this together." He placed a hand on my shoulder as the sun dipped below the horizon. I felt a sense of peace. The aftermath of betrayal had been hard, but it had also brought us closer as a family. I found the strength to keep moving forward when I moved back into the house. It felt like stepping into a different world. The rooms I knew so well now seemed strange. Shadows of memories lingered in every corner. It was hard to accept that this was my new reality, but I knew I had to face it. I spent the first few days cleaning and rearranging, trying to make the house feel like mine again. It was therapeutic in a way, each task a step towards reclaiming my space and my life. But there were still moments when the silence felt overwhelming. One evening, as I was sorting through old photo albums, Rachel called out, "Hey Dad, how are you?" The first few days were spent cleaning and rearranging, trying to make the house feel like mine again. It was therapeutic in a way, each task a step towards reclaiming my space and my life. But there were still moments when the silence felt overwhelming. One evening, as I was sorting through old photo albums, Rachel called out, "Hey Dad, how are you?" She asked in a warm, concerned voice. "I'm hanging in there, Rachel. Just trying to adjust to everything. I can come over, and we can have dinner together," she offered. "That sounds nice," I replied, feeling a wave of gratitude. When Rachel arrived, she brought takeout from my favorite Chinese restaurant. We sat at the kitchen table, the familiar aroma of sesame chicken and fried rice filling the air. "So how's the new job going?" I asked, trying to focus on something positive. "It's going well. I like the team and the work is interesting," she said, smiling. "It's a nice change." I replied, thinking about my own situation. "I'm glad to hear that change can be good, even if it's scary at first." Rachel nodded, taking a bite of her food. "Dad, I've been thinking maybe it's time for you to take up a new hobby or do something you've always wanted to do. I don't know. Remember how you always talked about learning to play the guitar? Why not give it a try now?" she suggested. "I suppose I could. It's not like I don't have the time," I said, considering the idea. "It could be fun. Who knows? You might discover a hidden talent," she said, giving me an encouraging smile. "All right. I'll think about it, thanks, Rachel." After dinner, we sat in the living room talking and reminiscing. It was comforting to have her there to share stories and laughter for a while. The house felt like a home again. The next day, I decided to take Rachel's advice. I went to a local music store and bought a beginner's guitar and a few instructional books. It felt strange stepping into something new at my age, but also exciting. That evening, I sat on the porch with the guitar, fumbling through the basic chords. It was frustrating at first, my fingers clumsy and uncoordinated, but as I kept practicing, I got better. I went to a local music store and bought a beginner's guitar and a few instructional books. It felt strange stepping into something new at my age, but also exciting. That evening, I sat on the porch with the guitar, fumbling through the basic chords. It was frustrating at first, as my fingers were clumsy and uncoordinated. But as I kept practicing, I started to find a rhythm and a sense of accomplishment in each small improvement. A few weeks later, Glenn came over for a visit and found me on the porch strumming the guitar. He teased, "Hey Dad, look at you rocking out." I said, smiling, "Want to give it a try?" He said, "Sure, why not?" Glenn said, taking the guitar. He gave it a go with a few chords, laughing at his own mistakes as we sat there passing the guitar back and forth. I felt a sense of connection and peace in that moment. This new reality was still difficult, but moments like these made it bearable. One afternoon, I received a call from Sue. It was unexpected, and I hesitated before answering. "I know this is out of the blue, but I was wondering if we could talk." "I'm sorry, Sue. I didn't mean to catch you off guard. What do you want to talk about?" "I just wanted to see how you're doing and to apologize again for everything." "I'm doing okay. It's been hard, but I'm trying to move forward. It's been tough, but I'm getting through it." I replied that I'm glad to hear that I'm trying to move forward too, but it's not easy. She said softly, "I know it's not, but we have to keep going for ourselves and for the kids." I said, feeling a mix of emotions, "You're right. I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry and I hope someday we can." She said, "Maybe we can be friends." "Sue, I know it's going to take time." I know. Thanks for talking to me, Kurt." She hung up before I could say anything else. I realized that even though the wounds were still fresh, there was a possibility of healing. This new reality wasn't what I had planned, but it was a chance to start over and find strength and happiness on my own terms with each passing day. I grew more accustomed to my new life. I kept practicing the guitar and found joy in music. I reconnected with old friends, took long walks in the park, and even started volunteering at a local community center. One evening, as I played a simple tune on the guitar, I felt a sense of calm and contentment. This new reality was challenging, but it was also an opportunity for growth and discovery. For the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful about the future. The holidays were approaching, and I was dreading this year being the first without Sue. The thought of Thanksgiving without her filled me with a mix of sadness and anxiety. But I knew I had to keep it together for the kids. They needed to see that we could still be a family, even if things were different a week before Thanksgiving. I called Glenn, Julia, and Rachel to invite them over for dinner. "Hey Glenn, how are you doing?" I asked when he picked up the phone. "I'm good, Dad. How about you?" "I'm getting by. Listen, I wanted to invite you all over for Thanksgiving. I think it would be good for us to be together," I said, trying to sound positive. "That sounds great, Dad. I'll be there," Glenn said without hesitation. I called Julia next. "Hi, Julia. Are you free for Thanksgiving? We could have dinner at my place, of course, Dad." "I'd love that," she said. Finally, I reached out to Rachel. "Hey." "Hi, Rachel. How are you holding up?" "I'm okay, thanks." "Dad, how are you?" "I'm doing all right. I wanted to see if you could come over for Thanksgiving. I think it would be good for us to be together," I said, hoping she would agree. "Definitely, Dad. I'll be there," she replied, with everyone on board. I started planning. I wanted the dinner to be special, a reminder that we were still a family despite everything. I woke up early to start cooking. The kitchen filled with the comforting smells of roasted turkey, stuffing, and pumpkin pie. It felt good to be doing something familiar. It brought back memories of happier times. Around noon, Glenn arrived carrying a bottle of wine. "Hey Dad, you smell great in here," he said, giving me a hug. "Thanks, Glenn. I'm glad you're here," I said, feeling a bit emotional. Next, Julia showed up with a homemade casserole. "Hi Dad, this looks amazing," she said, setting it down. The dish on the counter. "Thanks, Julia. I'm happy you could make it," I said, giving her a hug. Rachel arrived last, bringing a salad. "Hey Dad, this smells incredible," she said, smiling. "Thanks, Rachel. I'm glad we can all be together," I said, feeling a sense of warmth and pride. We sat down to eat, the table filled with laughter and conversation. It felt like old times, even if the dynamic had changed as we ate. We shared stories and memories, and the bonds between us grew stronger. Glenn raised his glass. "I just want to say how thankful I am for all of you. This year has been tough, but I'm grateful we've made it through," he said. "I'm grateful for you all being here. I've got you to thank for a lot." Julia and Rachel echoed this, raising their glasses after dinner. We moved to the living room, where Julia and Rachel started playing board games while Glenn and I talked. "Dad, I've been thinking about what you said before about moving forward," Glenn began. I asked, curious, if I was ready to take some steps in my own life. "I want to focus on my career, maybe even think about starting a family someday," he said, looking thoughtful. "That sounds like a great plan." "Glenn, I'm proud of you," I said, feeling a sense of pride. "Thanks. Dad, you've been through a lot, but you're handling it well." "It's inspiring," he said, giving me a smile later as we were cleaning up. Rachel came over to me. "Dad, I've been thinking too. I want to take a trip and see more of the world. I think it would be good for me," she said, her eyes bright with excitement. "That sounds wonderful, Rachel." I told her that travel can be a great way to find yourself. She thanked me and said she'd let me know all about it. We ended the evening gathered around the fireplace, talking and laughing. The warmth of the fire and the presence of my children filled me with a deep sense of contentment. We were still a family, despite everything. The ties that bound us were strong and unbroken by the trials we had faced. I watched my children and realized that this new reality, while different, held its own kind of beauty. We were healing slowly but surely, and the love we shared was stronger than ever. Family ties could withstand even the toughest storms. That night, as I lay in bed, I felt a sense of peace. The future was uncertain, but with my family by my side, I knew I could face whatever came next. We were together, and that was all that mattered. The new year brought a sense of renewal. I was still feeling the pain of the past year, but it was starting to fade. I had a cautious hope for the future. I decided it was time to take the next step in moving forward. One crisp Saturday morning, I walked into the local community center with my guitar case in hand. They offered a beginner's guitar. I thought it might be a good way to meet new people and improve my skills. The instructor, Mike, was a friendly guy in his 40s who made everyone feel at ease. He welcomed everyone and said we should have some fun and learn some music. As we settled in, I looked around the room and saw there was a great mix of ages and faces in the class, and everyone was really keen to learn. It felt good to be part of something new. As the weeks went by, I found myself looking forward to the classes. Not only was I improving on the guitar, but I was also making new friends. One of them was Linda, who was around my age and learning to play for one day after class. Linda said, "Hey Kurt, you're getting pretty good at this." "Thanks, Linda. I'm really enjoying it," I replied, feeling a sense of accomplishment. "Would you like to grab a coffee sometime? It'd be nice to chat outside of class," she suggested. "That sounds great," I replied. I said, smiling. We started meeting for coffee regularly, talking about everything from music to life. It was great to have someone to share my thoughts with, someone who understood. One evening, as I sat on my porch strumming the guitar, Glenn showed up unexpectedly. "Hey Dad, got a minute?" he asked, sitting down next to me. "Sure, Glenn. What's on your mind?" I asked, setting the guitar aside. "I've been thinking about what you said about moving forward. I want to start my own business. I have some ideas, but I wanted to get your opinion." I listened carefully, offering advice where I could. It felt good to support him and see him taking charge of his future. "Dad, your support means a lot to me. I wouldn't have had the courage to do this without you." I gave him a reassuring pat on the back. A few days later, Rachel called with exciting news. "Dad, I've booked my trip. I'm going to Europe for a month. I can't wait to explore and see new places." "Fantastic, Rachel. I'm really happy for you. You'll have an amazing time." I felt her enthusiasm rub off on me. "Thanks, Dad. I'll send you lots of pictures and updates." As the months passed, I continued to embrace my new reality. I joined a hiking group and rediscovered my love for the outdoors. The fresh air and exercise really lifted my spirits on one of our hikes. I struck up a conversation with a fellow hiker, Tom. "You know, Kurt, it's never too late to start over," Tom said as we reached a scenic overlook. "I've learned it the hard way, but you're right," I replied, taking in the view. "Life's about the journey, not just the destination." "You've got a lot of journey left," Tom said with a grin. I smiled, feeling a sense of camaraderie. Tom's words stuck with me. It was true. I had a lot of journey left, and it was up to me to make the most of it. One evening, I received a surprise visit from Sue. It had been months since we last spoke, so I was curious to see what she wanted. "Kurt, I know this is unexpected, but I wanted to talk," she said, standing on the porch. "Sure," I said, stepping aside to let her in. We sat down in the living room, the atmosphere tense but civil. I just wanted to say that I'm happy you're finding peace and happiness. I've been doing a lot of reflecting and I know I made mistakes," she began. "I appreciate that, Sue. It hasn't been easy, but I'm trying to move forward. I'm truly sorry for everything. I hope we can eventually be friends." She said that she and Kurt were friends for the sake of the kids. She sounded sincere. "Maybe in time, Sue. For now, let's focus on being good parents to Glenn, Julia, and Rachel." I agreed. "Thank you for listening, Kurt," she said before leaving, as I watched her drive away. I felt a sense of closure. It wasn't complete, but it was a step. With each passing day, I felt more confident and hopeful. I kept practicing the guitar and hiking with new friends, and I supported my kids in their endeavors. My life wasn't perfect, but it was full of promise and potential. One sunny afternoon, as I strummed my guitar on the porch, I reflected on how far I had come. The pain of the past was still there, but it no longer defined me. I was moving forward one step at a time, and I knew that no matter what lay ahead, I had the strength and support to face it. Life was a journey, and I was finally ready to embrace it with open arms.